Good afternoon. Welcome to the World Energy Outlook 2018 conference. For the opening remarks, I would like to call upon João Pedro Matos Fernandes, Minister for Environment and Energy Transition.
Good afternoon to everyone. I want to start by underlining the honor to have you here with us, the Executive Director of IEA, Mr. Birol. Be welcome to Portugal. This is the perfect occasion for us to hear from you on the IEA's main message and have a broad discussion about the challenges we are facing. As we know from our experience, and as the 2030 agenda is underlining, these challenges must be faced on a common approach by all. The evolution of world societies for globalization is only reinforcing the strategies of environmental policies to have all abroad for common actions. Bilateral agreements are important, but multilateral ones, especially the involvement of international organizations, are essential for the success of global sustainability. Portugal is an IEA member since 1981 and is fully engaged in its activities. We know the importance of the higher level and political events, such as the ministerial and governing board meetings, but Portugal is also very active in some of the technical work, such as the in-depth political reviews, the implementing agreements, or the exchange of basic information. Only with solid and current data it is possible to be more consistent when discussing and implementing any policy, strategy, or even a single measure. Furthermore, we acknowledge the quality of IEA's data and capacity of analyzing and foresight, as proved, for instance, every year with the launch of the World Energy Outlook. Other specific publications on oil, on coal, on power or renewable data are references in the energy world for years, but the WEO, analyzing the world energy market and presenting some in-depth forecasting of some of key factors that can influence its evolution, have the charm of pointing new visions for a more sustainable future. But before having the pleasure of listening your presentation, and we are mostly here for that, let me just make reference to the 2016 Portuguese government commitment to become carbon neutral by 2050, assuming that the greatest effort in this direction will be made in the next decade. A national carbon neutrality roadmap was prepared, which outlines a clear vision and pathways to reduce the emissions by at least 85% by 2050 compared to 2005 levels, and increase carbon sinks up to 12 megatons. By 2040, all service and commercial buildings should be 100% decarbonized. This transition is a challenge for the Portuguese economy. For sure, the investment will stimulate innovation, creativity, and competitive enterprises. The new technologies on which carbon neutrality will be based will lead to the development of new economic activities and will create jobs opportunities. We are thus aligned with the more ambitious objectives under the Paris Agreement, and we have been strongly advocating for an ambitious European long-term strategy, setting a clear and credible objectives of achieving carbon neutrality in the EU by 2050. The Energy and Climate National Plan, currently under public consultation, reflects different challenges, materializing the main actions to be developed by 2030, aligned with the neutrality trajectory. In this framework, we established a target to reduce the greenhouse emissions between 45% and 55%, a target for renewable energies in final energy consumption of 47%, with 80% of renewables in electricity generation, and a target for energy efficiency of 35%. Nowadays, Portugal's external energy dependence is about 75%, but will be 65% in 2030, and to be carbon neutral on 2050, it will have to be no more than 17%. This is ambitious but realistic. These targets are a natural sequence to our previous achievements and are aligned with our future challenges. Although all sectors must contribute to emissions reduction, it is the energy sector the one that should contribute the most for this reduction, in particular the energy generation and consumption, as well as transportation. Therefore, we will double our installed capacity of renewables, especially solar and wind, and close our all coal power plants up to 2030. We also intend to focus on the reinforcement of energy efficiency as a cross-cutting area to all activity sectors: industrial, residential, services, and mobility. In this context, a new model for the transmission and distribution grids will have to be considered, with the development of capacity of those networks in a short term, including storage, response to decentralized generation, digitalization, and interconnections reinforcement. In line with global trends, there is a clear bet on economy electrification. Although this trend is cross-cutting to several sectors of activity, it is on transport that this trend will be more visible. I would like to remember that transports are responsible for almost 25% of national greenhouse gas emissions. It is also the sector where we expect more disruptions in the next decade. This plan sets targets for renewables in transports of 20%, with a strong contribution given by a raising in the consumption of electricity in transports that will represent 10%. To find the references to some of the Portugal-specific international actions on energy. The first one regarding Africa, where Portugal has historical relations and now has a program for development cooperation. Our priorities are related with climate change, and our actions are mainly directed to the African Portuguese-speaking countries and the African Mediterranean countries. In our interaction with the IEA, we believe we can add value to your reflections and initiatives, for instance, by sharing our experience and know-how of the social interaction with local communities, or merely by facilitation of language obstacles, as our cooperation with the Portuguese translation of the the African Energy Outlook. A second reference to the common Iberian strategy on interconnections on gas and electricity. With the creation of these two Iberian markets and taking into consideration the rapid evolution of solar and wind capacities and also the penetration of LNG in the gas market, the energy security of both markets will be improved with the facilitation of access to the Central European markets, not only for the European security, but also in terms of Iberian renewable resilience. But now, it is time to listen to what we consider the most profound and credible analysis of the energy world. We are lucky enough to have Mr. Fatih Birol, that before becoming the executive director of the agency, he was already the chief economist of the same organization, mainly responsible for the WEO for a long time. Thank you for coming.
Mr. Minister, distinguished colleagues, a very good afternoon to all of you. It's a great pleasure to be back to Lisbon. To be back to Lisbon today. I had a very good, very fruitful discussions this morning with Mr. Minister. Thank you very much, sir, for organizing these meetings with him, with State Secretary, and several industry leaders here in this country. And it's a great opportunity to share with you the views of the International Energy Agency about the global energy markets. I will mainly focus on the world energy outlook, but also give you some of the recent IEA figures that we have. As Mr. Minister mentioned, world energy outlook still, as they call it, the Bible of the energy world, and this edition I am going to show you now has been once again the best-selling energy book in the world. Before going to a World Energy Outlook, I should tell you something which is not in my slides. Before coming here, I studied once again closely with the numbers of Portugal and listened today from Mr. Minister the plans that the government has for the next years to come for energy and climate change. And I can tell you in front of Mr. Minister that I am deeply impressed, not only with the expectations, but what has been achieved in the country, both in terms of energy, CO2 emission reductions in a growing economic context. So this is not something that I see when I travel over all the world, and therefore congratulations, Mr. Minister, for the great success, and I hope to see this success story becomes a source of inspiration for many countries around the world. Now, coming to our presentation, before looking at the future, perhaps a few words about today. Where is the global energy markets? There are different signs going on. If I can take you a few things here. First, about the oil markets. Lots of volatility in the prices we are going to see, and this is mainly as a result of geopolitics becoming once again part of the oil markets. Iran, Venezuela, Libya, even recently Algeria, major oil producers, are facing many important challenges. Natural gas, as I will show you, growing very strongly in many parts of the world, but the driver by far in the world is China. On the other hand, we are seeing solar PV as a result of the reduction in the cost becoming a major pillar of our energy system. But I will show you in a second that the CO2 emissions are still on the rise. One issue that Mr. Minister mentioned, which is very close to our hearts in the agency, is the access to electricity, especially in Africa. Today, ladies and gentlemen, 2 out of 3 people in Africa, they have no electricity. And this is a major issue. In some parts of the world, we don't know what to do with the excess amount of energy we have. And in Africa, 2 out of 3 people have no electricity. The continent, which has perhaps the most valuable and the richest sources of energy: gas, oil, solar, hydro, and wind. So this is an area very important for the IEA, and it is the reason we have this year the Year of Africa for the International Energy Agency. And today, in the entire world, about 1 billion people, but most of them in Africa, have no access to electricity still. Now, global energy demand is growing strongly, but global electricity demand grows 2 times faster than the energy demand. This is very important to note, together with the 2 important other factors, namely digitalization of our societies, plus the share of renewable energies, solar and wind, becoming part of the electricity generation. And as such, we see the global electricity industry, which is about 100 years old, is going through a profound transformation of how it is operating. Strong electricity demand growth, digitalization, and the share of renewables. As we all know, I will mention in a moment, solar and wind are not always there when we want them, but we are going to do that, and we are seeing there is a lot of transformation going there. Now, policymakers, therefore, we believe in this changing world, lots of things are moving, very dynamic, needs sound advice, and we hope, as the International Energy Agency, we are providing this to our member governments around the world, Portugal being one of the leading countries in this area. Now, before again looking at the future, 2018, what happened? Very important year. Why? First of all, we saw that the world energy demand increased the highest in the last decade. Very strong growth because of the economy, because of the emerging countries driven. And which fuels contribute to this growth? Who are the winners? Who are the losers in the year 2018? When you look at the number globally, we see that the natural gas alone was responsible about half of the global energy demand growth alone, followed by renewable energies and others. So this is something to take note of. Natural gas growth is very, very strong worldwide. One rather worrying news globally. Global renewables increase every year in the last 20 years or so, but the year 2018, when you look at all of them, we have seen that unfortunately the growth is flat. Renewables growth is flat. It didn't grow, unlike some countries, such as Portugal. Globally, it didn't grow, mainly as a result of two things. China, solar policies, incentives changed. China was the main driver of solar energy, but also some bad news from wind energy in some countries in Europe. Now, CO2 emissions, the biggest problem, climate change. Now, we have a lot of targets. United Nations, IPCC, every time they'll tell us, we have to see deeper decline in the emissions. And energy sector is at the heart of it, because more than 2/3 of the emissions causing climate change come from the energy sector. And when we look at the numbers, in the last few years, we didn't see a decline, but at least a flat. But 17, we have seen an increase. We hoped that this was a one-off year. We will go back to again, a decline or at least flattening. But ladies and gentlemen, our numbers show that in 2018, global emissions reached a historical high. Historical number of targets set by the governments, historical increase in the emissions. So what worries me the most is that there is a growing disconnect between the targets and what is happening in the markets. As such, what Mr. Minister told me, what I read in our statistics, that Portugal last year registered a significant decline in its CO2 emissions, is something for you, Mr. Minister, for your government to be proud of in the context of what is happening in the global markets. Now, ladies and gentlemen, global energy scene is changing. The leaders and the followers are changing. And every country has to understand what is happening in the world. As I said this morning, no country is an energy island. They are all affecting each other. In the year 2000, it means yesterday, United States was the #1 energy consumer of the world, followed by Europe. But now, in the last few years, there was a big change. We have seen that China became #1, took over for the United States, and Europe went #3. And based on the economic growth, based on the population, this is even changing even much more strongly now. We are seeing that China will continue to be the biggest consumer of energy in the world, but India, Africa are going up. And Europe, which was number 2 only yesterday, is going to go number 5. So, but Africa, Mr. Minister mentioned the importance of Africa. Africa has a huge potential to grow. Huge potential to grow, economically growth, and the only, perhaps the main barrier in front of the African economic development is access to energy, and as such, I appreciate very much the Portuguese government to have a strong emphasis on Africa, like the International Energy Agency does. Because the Africa, access to energy means economic growth, and which is a good news for all of us around the world. So, the geography of energy is changing, and you will see, and perhaps you already saw, that the geopolitics of energy, the foreign policy of some countries, defense policy of some countries are changing according to this very picture. Now, based on the current trends, we look which fuels are the winners, which fuels will be the losers in the next years to come. First of all, we still expect the biggest growth will come from renewable energies, driven by wind and solar energy, especially coming from the developing countries. But we also see that the natural gas grows very strongly as a result of plenty of new gas coming from different countries around the world in terms of production. And here, not only for the electricity generation, but industry is going to be a major user. Oil, still growing. Cars, but more importantly, petrochemical industry is a major driver, and also trucks around the world, and the planes are important drivers, and oil demand will grow. Slower than in the past, but still a growth we are seeing. The mixed picture on coal. While we see in the advanced economies coal is declining, still we see a lot of new coal plants built in, especially in Asian developing countries. So this is the picture we see. Renewables are growing strongly, followed by gas, and the others are following. Now, oil markets is something that we all need to pay attention to, because oil prices are important, at least oil price for many countries, especially those like Portugal, who is an important country for the current account balance. When we look at the next years to come, we see that the United States alone is responsible about 70% of the growth in the global oil production, followed by other countries. US, but also Brazil, especially the offshore developments in Brazil, are major drivers of oil supply. But as I mentioned to you, what we are seeing in the oil markets, 4 major oil-producing countries, Venezuela, Iran, as well as Libya and Algeria, facing major challenges, which means volatility in the oil prices in the next years to come. Now, gas markets. Maybe another important point for Portugal is with the LNG terminals here. You know that the gas is transported in 2 ways, either pipelines or LNG. In the year 2000, about 75% of the gas was transported by pipelines, 25% by LNG. And when we look at today, we see the share of LNG is growing very strongly. And based on the existing contracts and the under construction facilities, we see that in a few years of time, LNG will be the #1 way of transporting natural gas. In the year 2000, ladies and gentlemen, there were only 10 countries that were importing LNG, 10 countries. And 2025, there will be at least 49, let's say 50 countries, from 10 to 50. This is mainly as a result of shale revolution in the United States, but also Australia, Qatar, and it is very important to make the most use of LNG here. And for the many countries, it is providing a lot of opportunities because a wave of LNG exports coming to the markets from different parts of the world. And it is the very reason we see in many parts of the world there is a downward pressure on the LNG prices. This puts many regions in a very nice position in terms of pipelines or LNG, and Europe is one of them. In Europe today, the domestic production is in decline, mainly Netherlands. My colleague, Mr. Art van Bohemen, our head of country studies division, is from Netherlands, and as he reports, as many observers reports, we see the Dutch production, Groningen, is in decline, and when we look at all the other contracted gas contracts in Europe, we put them, all of them together, Russian gas, Norwegian gas, Caspian and North African, there is a significant amount of LNG needed to be imported or gas to be imported in Europe, about 100 BCM by 2025. Now the key question that the European decision makers are facing, this 100 BCM, the difference between their demand and already in the bank, in the pocket, gas, where will they get this 100 BCM from? Pipeline or LNG? And Europe is in a fortunate position now. Europe will look who is offering the best options for them. Are we going to, in Europe, import more pipeline gas from the existing gas exporters? Are we going to make use of our LNG facilities and make better interconnections and bring it to European customers? Or are we going to choose another way? Our suggestion as International Energy Agency, as there were 2 weeks ago, a major LNG meeting in Brussels with Commissioner Cañete, myself, and several ministers. We suggested to Europe, please make use of this LNG wave coming. Make use of the lots of rather moderate prices. Build your interconnections and make a strong case for the gas and reduce your import dependency from one single source. So therefore, it is very important that Europe makes the most out of the LNG wave in its place coming from US, Qatar, Australia, and elsewhere. Now, coming to Europe, when we look at the European electricity generation, we see a big sea change. Coal, deep decline everywhere. As a result of the natural end of the lifetime of some of the coal plants, and in some countries, like in Portugal, governments are pushing for early retirements because of the environmental challenges. Then we look at the nuclear power. Many countries are not extending the lifetime of nuclear power plants, and some countries are forcing for early retirement, such as the case in Germany. It is also in a decline. We see natural gas keeping its position more or less, and the bioenergy, geothermal still showing a slight increase, and the solar making a strong case. But for us, for the International Energy Agency, the biggest news is in less than 10 years of time, wind is becoming #1 source of electricity generation in Europe. This is a very important development. #1 source of electricity generation in Europe will be less than 10 years of time, wind. Onshore wind and offshore wind. We have high expectations of offshore wind as well. Onshore wind show its muscles and pushing and penetrating the power markets. But offshore wind, we are expecting significant declines in the cost and becoming a part of the European and global electricity mix here. But something to note is the wind is very soon becoming the first source of power generation in Europe. Now, I told you that the solar and wind is growing. This is a very good news. I believe at least it's a very good news for environment and in many cases for the economy. Because when the adventure of solar and wind started, they were expensive. They were environmentally benign, but they were expensive. Many people said they are good, but expensive. But now, they are good, but at the same time, not expensive. In many cases, they are able to compete with the traditional electricity sources. So in my view, the first half, since I am in Portugal, first half of the match is won, 45 minutes for renewables. But now there's a second half. Namely, how to integrate in the best way solar and wind in our power systems. This is a major challenge. Because we have seen in some countries some unexpected negative surprises in terms of blackouts. Because as we all know, solar and wind are very good, but they are intermittent. They may be now here, in the afternoon not there, because of they are nature-bound, their availability. How we make our systems better. And when we look at around the world, we see that if the share of wind and solar less than 10%, it is not a big problem. With the existing power system, we can make this system working. But if the share grows in many countries, like in Portugal, coming about 25%, then you have to make your investments very, very well and targeted investments in the grids and providing flexibilities. And if it goes even beyond that, as many countries aim to do, like Portugal, Germany, and the others, then we have to bring more flexibilities in the systems. Now, we all talk about the storage systems. We have the electricity storage is very important, but it is yet not with us in a big and commercial terms. Nobody can afford a blackout because of the increasing share of wind and solar. This is very important. Therefore, if we want to continue to have the confidence of the public, confidence of the investors, we should avoid any type of this incidents. And in my view, some governments think around the world, I go around the world, When it comes to renewables, they have one job, to push the renewables. I tell them, no, you have two jobs. One, yes, push the renewables, but the second job is make sure that the market is well designed, the operators are very well equipped to integrate them in the electricity systems. So therefore, let's don't forget, every match is 90 minutes, not 45 minutes. There's a second half, and if there are some problems in the second half, it is not a good news. Therefore, I am very happy that when I talk with Mr. Minister today and with the representative of the REN, they are well aware of the issues that we have to build flexibilities in the Portuguese power system, in addition to pushing them strongly, as Mr. Minister highlighted, in the context of roadmap to 2050 being a carbon neutral country. Now, before finishing my words, I wanted to highlight to you, again looking at globally, for me the biggest challenge of our climate change. Now, if we talk about Europe, Portugal, Europe is, of course, the champion of the fight against climate change. No question about it. Very good. But ladies and gentlemen, Europe is responsible today only 9% of the global emissions, not even 10%. 9%. 91% of the emissions come from somewhere else. Okay? So it means whatever Europe does is important to be a good example from a moral perspective, being the good student in the class. But when it comes to global trends, to be very frank, it doesn't have a big impact on the global CO2 emissions. Therefore, and we all know that the CO2 emissions coming from Lisbon or from Shanghai or from Detroit or from Bombay has the same effect on everybody. CO2 emissions don't have a passport. It affects everybody. For example, one of the regions which is very bad example, in fact, very strong example is Africa. When you look at the cumulative emissions, the responsibility, the sins of Africa is less than 2%. But the biggest impact on climate change is on Africa. It's very unfair, but this is how the nature is today functioning. We all see in televisions what is happening in Mozambique, the hurricane in Mozambique, or the drought in Africa. So therefore, it is important to have a global picture. And I tell you, from my point of view, there are many challenges in terms of climate change. What is the most important challenge in terms of climate change today? Let me explain you very slowly. First of all, with the current trends, what we have now, the world is perfectly on track of a temperature increase 3 degrees Celsius at least, which means, as the scientists tell us, more or less a catastrophe for the fragile equilibrium of our planet, the hurricanes, droughts, and everything, and fires everywhere. What we would like to see is we want to see, as we say, a green line, which is the sustainable future, which is a Paris. Green is Paris, blue is 3 degrees. Now, I asked my colleagues to calculate the following. This is the bad news. I told them, if the current infrastructure we have in the world, power plants, cars, industrial facilities, refineries, if they continue to function in the next 25 years, throughout their economic lifetime, how much of the emissions allowed us to be in line with the Paris, this green line? They look at country by country, power plant by power plant, industrial facility by industrial facility. What they have found out is the 95% of the budget given to us by the Paris target is already eaten up by the existing infrastructure, 95%. So it means we have no chance to build anything which is not renewables unless we retire some of the power plants or factories earlier than their economic lifetime. This is the biggest challenge. The issue is not what we will build today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. The issue is the existing infrastructure is already eating up almost all the budget given to us. This is the problem. And I go further. Here, the biggest part is the coal-fired power plants in the world. The single most important one. And this is about 1/3 of the emissions alone. Now, worse, we have coal plants in Asia, in Europe and United States. In Europe and United States, the average age of a coal plant is 42 years old. But in developing Asia, the average age is less than 15 years old. In India, China, Indonesia, Thailand, and those countries do not want to shut down their coal plants before the plants owners, they get their money back. I was 3 weeks ago in Germany. I praised Mr. Altmaier, the economy minister, for the very important move they are having on the Kohleausstieg, the leaving the coal. It's a big job in Germany. I don't know how much you follow, but I told the Mr. Minister, in Germany you have 40 gigawatts. In Asia we have 2,000 gigawatts. Second, in Europe I said the 42 years old, in China, India, 11 years old. And those countries are not as rich as Germany today. So for me, this is the biggest problem. What are we going to do? Almost 2,000 gigawatts of young coal fleet in Asia. This is the nerve center of the problem. Forget what we are going to build, but these are the plants already there and under construction. And as I said, emissions coming from Asia or from Portugal or United States, it affects all of us at the same time. No change. The nature doesn't have the, in quote, fairness to put the more impact on the countries which has the more emissions. It goes everybody. So therefore, we have to find a solution for this. It's an area that IEA is working with many countries. To finish, ladies and gentlemen, to put some of the thoughts together. I was telling Mr. Minister in the car, I am, in addition to being the head of the International Energy Agency, I have another hat. I am the chair of the Davos World Economic Forum on Energy. And since 13 years, I follow all the meetings. I have never seen any year where the geopolitics were so dominant in the energy discussions in Davos. Davos is the barometer for the global energy discussions for many, many reasons which are important to follow. We see that the oil demand is growing strongly, but in some countries there are challenges in terms of new production coming in the markets. Electricity is growing very strongly, as I mentioned, much stronger than energy demand, but the integration of renewables remains a major issue. I am very happy to hear from Mr. Minister and from the regulator, Portuguese regulators themselves, that the flexibility issue in the electricity markets in a renewables growing context is taken seriously by this very government. Now, when we look at the emissions around the world, we see that the challenge is so big. As I show you, 2018, again, a big growth. I show you also the existing infrastructure. While renewables and energy efficiency are very important to fight against climate change, but we do not have the luxury in the world that I like this clean energy technology, but I don't like the other one. We need all of them, depending on the country, depending on the context. So we at the IEA believe that there is no single fuel single solution which can help us to address this huge problem, global problem worldwide. We need to make all of them carbon capture, hydrogen, and others. And finally, we are at the IEA. We are 300 world energy experts in the IEA. We are at the disposal of our governments, helping them to share experiences, learning from each other, providing them some recommendations in many areas, and learning from their experiences and giving to other countries. I was very impressed today, Mr. Minister's presentation on the new roadmap of carbon neutrality, and I congratulated him for that. So we are sharing this experience, good and bad experiences, and they are learning, governments are learning from each other. But we want to not only show the slides, but also provide real, concrete world solutions for the governments. So thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to me. Thank you very much.
And now for the closing remarks, I would like to call upon João Galamba, Secretary of State of Energy.
Good afternoon to you all. Boa tarde a todos. Dear Mr. Fatih Birol, dear Minister of Environment and Energy Transition, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by emphasizing the words of the Minister of the Environment and Energy Transition and say that it was an honor to receive the Executive Director of IEA, Dr. Fatih Birol, presenting the World Energy Outlook at EA's main recommendations and messages about the challenges we are facing. As we know from our experience, and as the 2030 agenda is underlining, these challenges must be faced on a common approach by all. Portugal is an IEA member since 1991 and it's fully engaged in all its activities. We recognize the importance of the higher level and political events such as the ministerial and governing board meetings, but Portugal is also very active in some of the technical work, namely participating in a majority of the meetings and committees, working parties and working groups. On a permanent basis, we maintain a consistent exchange of basic information regarding our energy sector. Portugal is completely involved in the in-depth reviews program, not only participating on the exercises about Portugal, but at the same time integrating some of the experts team evaluating other countries' policies. Portugal has always supported this program as one of the core activities of IEA, together with the databases and the strategic emergency stockholding. Portugal maintains its supporting position and even considers this pillar as an essential one for the development of any initiative to reinforce the association or the Open the Doors initiative. We support the emergency exercises, not only for IEA members, but also for the main IEA partners, as a continuous training tool to stimulate the rapid and effective answer to created problems, guaranteeing the acting capacity of the system as a whole. The world of energy is changing quickly. It is imperative that the right choices are made in the shift to a low-carbon economy, ensuring affordable, secure, and sustainable energy for businesses and households. Portugal is strongly committed with the decarbonization of our society. A national carbon neutrality roadmap is under preparation, which outlines a clear vision and pathways to reduce the emissions by at least 85% compared to 2005 levels by 2050, and increase carbon sinks up to 12 megatons. I can tell you that, according to recent data, Portugal is a front runner in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in the European Union, according to 2018 data recently published. To be carbon neutral by 2050, Portugal needs to completely decarbonize electricity generation and to decarbonize mobility. The next decade is critical to ensure alignment with this neutrality trajectory. The National Energy and Climate Plan, currently under public consultation, reflects different challenges, materializing the main actions to be developed by 2030, aligned with a neutrality trajectory. In this framework, we have set an ambitious national target of attaining 47% of our final energy consumption from renewable sources. This means that we'll have to double our renewable electricity production capacity between 2025 and 2030, which goes hand in hand with the aim of electrifying all sectors of the economy. Let me highlight a few of the areas we are working on at the moment to reinforce the renewable capacity of solar origin power in Portugal. The first is the auction mechanism. In July this year, an auction with 1,350 megawatts of capacity will take place. In January 2020, it's planned to happen a new auction of around 700 megawatts. And the plan that is included in the National Climate and Energy Plan is to do 2 auctions a year until we fulfill our goals in centralized production. In a scenario of strong demand for production licenses, auctions are the best way to satisfy this demand, accelerating investment in new capacity, guaranteeing the execution, and allowing a better interaction between the issuing of licenses and investments in the new network capacity. A significant investment volume in new solar capacity is crucial to achieve the goal of 60% of electricity produced from renewable sources in 2020, and further increasing that figure to at least 80% by 2030. We will need additional 6 to 7 gigawatts around 2030 in solar. This will be done through auctions for centralized production, but also through changes in the Portuguese legal framework that will allow decentralized production to flourish, and we will allow the creation of energy communities, democratizing and liberalizing significantly the production of the decentralized production, mainly of solar. These are political actions with great ambition, but we are sure also based on solid facts. It could be a very interesting initiative for IEA to have a view on these documents, especially when we are approaching the new in-depth review. At the same time, we are determined to continue pursuing this path. This will only be possible if we develop a robust energy transition, or I should say, a resilient energy revolution. The EU long-term strategy foresees that the biggest effort on decarbonization will have to be made by the energy sector. The decarbonization of the economy and energy transition, with the aim of reaching carbon neutrality by 2050, consists in a unique opportunity to abandon fossil fuel imports while taking full advantage of our endogenous resources, creating wealth and national cohesion in the most democratic manner. We are a lucky country compared to others because we don't have the opportunity costs that other countries have. Abandoning the fossil fuel model, for us, it's only a benefit. It has no cost because we don't produce it. We are fully dependent on its imports. So we are at an economic advantage compared to other countries. We can abandon and leave this model without evaluating the costs for employment, or at least without the same challenges that other countries that are producers of these same products face. In that sense, Portugal is a lucky country. The transition towards a low-carbon economy cannot be achieved only with the efforts of the public sector. The transition to a global energy system where all citizens have access to affordable, safe, and sustainable energy will depend on the rhythm of innovation and technology development. It will also depend on the conditions for private investment. It is therefore fundamental that we are able to give the right signal and stabilize the running policies in order to give the necessary confidence for private sector to raise investments in these areas. We also believe this is a great opportunity to look for innovative ways of cooperation between Portuguese public and private entities and the IEA, an international reference on this sector. The complexity of globalization impacts nowadays in every human activity, and the interactions among them imposes the need of a better and more integrated and inclusive dialogue with all the stakeholders and involving all nations that can be facilitated by an organization such as IEA. All in all, the path forward in these transformative times is long and requires a coherent investment strategy, which will take the full benefit of the most effective and efficient means that may contribute to the reduction of our energy dependency, promote social well-being, strengthen economic competitiveness, encourage scientific innovation, foster environmental protection, and mitigate the effects of climate change. We all have challenges. We have to face them, embrace them, defy them, and overcome them. And we will be successful, I'm sure. Thank you very much.
Our conference has now reached an end. Thank you for your presence and a good afternoon.